explain those Badlands. That's a hell of a name.
Good evening. Today is Black Monday, the day the Dow dropped more than 500 points.
Please join me in welcoming George Soros.
It's panic. Everyone's everybody would try to find a bottom.
To stand up and do something, become really engaged in the electoral process in this country.
What we have to confront is a deep, systemic and structural restructuring of our world. And this will take some time. And the world will look differently after we have gone through this transition process.
For centuries, they've been stuffing their stomachs with human flesh, and they've been stuffing their pockets with money. But they must realize that this bowl of vampires is about to end.
We have an army of digital soldiers.
That this is coming. This is going to be a part of a future where we can take back our power in ways we didn't even think about in the industrial age that are coming in the digital age.
But the common people of these countries in their heart, they can feel what's happening. They can see our struggle for our independence, for our true sovereignty. And they see this connection with their aspirations to be truly independent, which is exacerbated by the fact that in the Western elites there is a strong desire to freeze the current unfair state of things in international affairs.
Well, let me tell you something, brother. When they took a shot at my hero, and they tried to kill the next President of the United States, enough was enough. And I said, let Trumpomania run wild, brother. Let Trumpomania rule again. Let Trumpomania make America great again.
People who don't believe are walking dead. They are asleep. And this is the awakening.
Russian President Vladimir Putin says the civil war, as he calls it, in the Ukraine is the fault of the United States. He told an economic forum that while Russia has troops still massed on the Ukraine border, it is the U.S. that is fomenting violence. Daria Bondarchuk reports from Moscow.
During the question and answer session at the Economic Forum in St. Petersburg, Vladimir Putin said that February events in Ukraine, when pro-European protesters took power in Kiev, was a coup d'etat, which evolved into a civil war.
There was a coup d'etat backed by our American and European partners. Then there was chaos. And now we are witnessing a full-scale civil war.
The president stressed that Russia, more than any country, is interested in halting violence and restoring order in eastern Ukraine.
We are interested that on our western borders, I am speaking without any irony, in our brother country Ukraine, peace has begun and calmness. And of course, we work even today with those who control the power. But after the election, we will, of course, work with the newly elected structures.
Furthermore, he pledged that Russia will respect the choice of the Ukrainian people, who are set to elect a new president on May 25th. Speaking on economic sanctions introduced by the West against Russia over its alleged interference into Ukrainian crisis, Vladimir Putin suggested some countries to gain economic advantage.
настаивая на применении санкций в отношении России,
insisting on applying sanctions to Russia. Maybe our American friends, they are sophisticated guys, want to get a competitive advantage in their trade and economic relations over Europe.
The Russian president said that sanctions could have a boomerang effect in the modern world where all economies are interconnected. He expressed hope that after elections in Ukraine are held, all military actions in its southeastern regions will be ended. Daria Bondarchuk, CCTV, Moscow.
This is chapter 46, the Maidan Coup. This is a big one, otherwise known as the Revolution of Dignity. That is actually how it is officially referred to in Western media. That's how it's referred to on Wikipedia. That's how it's referred to by the AIs. They don't refer to it as the Maidan Coup because in their eyes, it was not a coup. It was a glorious revolution. This is a big one. This is a very, very big kind of bottleneck where a lot of characters, storylines, events all kind of come together and weave together. And we kind of start taking all these individual strands that we've been exploring over the past, 15 chapters. And they start weaving together into a rope that I think takes us to the first Trump term. So this is a really, really big episode or a big chapter. And the more I prepared for this, the more I realized it's too ambitious to try to cover the entire thing at once. Because again, there's just so many characters and there's so many factions and organizations and things. So we're going to try to do a high level kind of understanding of what was this thing, this event that we hear about so much, kind of try to wrap our head around that, wrap our head around the big characters involved, familiarize ourselves with the storyline, but then also these characters, the ones that we're familiar with, how they played a role, how they're connected, how this all connects to events that we've already been talking about, the Orange Revolution. And then, I think in future episodes, as we go back and cover some of these other topics, the Maidan Coup will be a big part of that, of that discussion. For example, we'll probably do an episode, a chapter on the Azov Battalion. So the Azov Battalion was formed as part of the Maidan Coup, but there's so much to the Azov Battalion that we will spend half the episode, half the chapter, just talking about the Azov Battalion if we focus too much on that, if that makes sense. So that's just one example, but Igor Kolomoisky would be another one. Yeah. So anyway, let's back up before we get too deep into it. Let's hear a word from a few sponsors.
What up, Badlanders? Are you ready to rock something new in 2026? Well, as always, we got you covered with the Rise Badlands Native Collection. Built from the rich tones and rugged terrain of the Dakotas, equal parts beautiful and brutal. Old roots, new vibe. Whether you got gators in your backyard or you have to take a bush plane to the post office, Badlanders are worldwide. Different dirt, same tribe. By the way, your friends at Rise have a deal for you. Show up at GART rocking your native gear. Swing by our booth and get in to win a free Badlands Rise hoodie of your choice. And don't forget, every order throws fuel on the fire of the Made in USA parallel economy. So grab something now at badlandsmedia.tv/rise.
It's finally here, our second annual mega sale. This sale only comes around once a year, so take advantage of the best offers ever while you can. For example, save 50% on our Giza Dream bed sheets, as low as $29.98. And for the first time ever on TV, MyPillow mattresses and MyPillow mattress toppers, as low as $99.98. And you save 50% on our Lux Pure 6-piece towel sets, regular $69.98 now only $39.98. And our best-selling standard My Pillows, regular $49.98, on sale for $17.98. Wait on it, mega sale, only $14.98. So go to mypillow.com or call the number on your screen. Use this promo code to take advantage of our second annual mega sale. But wait, there's more. To make the mega sale even more special, when you order right now, your order's going to ship absolutely free.
All right, and we'll go ahead and hit let's go ahead and hit soft disclosure as well.
Get you some of that beard oil.
Now that I'm alone at the close-up, do you see how awesome my beard looks right now?
I use the beard oil every single day. First thing.
Comes out feeling all silky smooth.
I take the dropper and I manually apply the oil
To every
directly
hair.
to my mustache.
Nice and, oh man, I love it.
And then I do drops all throughout the hair, and then I just rub it all in. And then I top it off with the tallow stick on the face.
But I feel like I have to grow a beard just to try this beard oil. It sounds
Do it, Jay.
amazing.
It's all from softdisclosure.com, and the best part about it is you'll be supporting Badlands Media, Annie from Willow and Farms, and basically 3 of Annie's neighbors. So that's 5 total American companies that you'd be supporting with one purchase.
I have been using the Soft Disclosure scentless beard oil every day after the shower. It looks unkempt, but it feels silky smooth. I want to look a little wild and unapproachable, but for the woman I trust, she'll be like, oh, it's actually kind of soft. He is approachable after all. Otherwise, stay away. And Soft Disclosure will help you too with that if that's the very specific vibe you're going for.
That is very specific, yes.
You guys are supporting American businesses when you do that. It's absolutely incredible, and you get a great, great product.
All right, yes, and thank you to all of our partners. Highly recommend the beard oil from Soft Disclosure. I've been using it, and the beard feels great. So yes, softdisclosure.com. Also, Rise Attire. Our friends there are fantastic. Really appreciate Adrian coming on last week to educate us on his research with the fashion industry. I think that was a nice little detour, and we look forward to having him back on again when his part 3 comes out. So yeah, let's jump into this. There's some videos that I do want to watch that we'll get to, but let's kind of do a rough overview because again, it's a big subject. I think a lot of people, I think, feel like they might have a handle on this, on the subject, like the macro, but getting into the minutia and understanding the nuance, I think really helps to connect some of the dots. And frankly, as I go through, there's so many names and there's so many Ukrainians who I'm trying to remember. But then you come across a name you recognize, and it's like this aha moment, right? So the big player, the narrative that I've kind of latched onto, the big player that kind of takes us from the Orange Revolution of 2004, which is what we did 2 weeks ago, to the Maidan Coup of 2014, is this woman, Tymoshenko, right here. And she's kind of like the Maria Corina Machado of Ukraine. She's this pretty younger woman who, again, right around the same time of Maria Corina Machado, like the early 2000s, they're trying to plug her in as like this leader in Ukraine, right? She's like this emerging populist leader that's very sympathetic to Europe. That's very sympathetic to the European Union. The European Union at this point is less than 10 years old. It was founded in 1993. So by the time the Orange Revolution comes around in 2004, it's only 11 years old. You can see in this picture that I'm showing you right here, she has the traditional Ukrainian hairstyle. So, they're definitely trying to like tell a story here with this woman, just like they did with Maria Corina Machado. And she, of course, has the very interesting background. Her background is She is plugged in as the head of this company. This is in the mid 90s. So after the collapse of the Soviet Union, we talked about the aluminum wars of the 90s. That was where Russia was privatizing all of its businesses. It was offering coupons to its citizens to buy stock in these companies, these state companies that they were taking public. The oligarchs were coming in and basically offering cash for these coupons at a big discount. And that's how the oligarchs basically amassed a bunch of ownership in these companies. A lot of these oligarchs were former KGB. Igor Kolomoisky is one of them. We'll get to him soon enough. But one of these companies that emerges is the United Energy Systems of Ukraine, UESU. It was a private Ukrainian energy trading company founded in the mid-90s. It became one of the largest intermediaries importing Russian and Central Asian natural gas into Ukraine during this turbulent, aluminum war era. And the company is best known now because Julia, I guess you say her name is Julia. I'm just going to call her Julia because Julia is going to be too hard for me to keep saying. But Julia Tymoshenko, she's the president of this company before she enters politics. And you can see from this map right here, this shows the infrastructure that is emerging in the 30 years after the collapse of the Soviet Union. These are all pipelines, right? Pipelines kind of become like this defining feature, this defining thing, both oil and gas, natural gas pipelines across Eastern Europe, the Middle East, Asia. And again, I really think that this played a really significant role in us invading Afghanistan. I think a big reason we invaded Afghanistan was because there was a concern about pipelines being built in Afghanistan that would have connected Iran to China, that would have connected Central Asia to the Middle East, and they wanted to make sure that did not happen. And of course, Pepe Escobar wrote about that extensively in the late 2000s. But you can see these pipelines that are not built at the collapse of the Soviet Union. Some of them are, but most of them are not. And we'll kind of talk about how some of these evolve and emerge, because we have these energy crises that unfold in the 2000s. One of them is a direct result of the Orange Revolution, and that is the 2006 energy crisis. So the 2006 energy crisis, again, I'm not trying to jump around too much, but I'm just trying to make sure that the narrative we're telling is comprehensive. Well, before we get to the energy crisis of 2006, let's finish the UESU, this energy company, this energy trading company that Tymoshenko is running. So let's see. Ukraine depends heavily on imported natural gas that's coming from Russia. Companies like this one were created to purchase gas from Turkmenistan and Russia and then resell it in Ukraine. They handle like complex debt settlements between state entities. They function as an intermediary. So we learn about these intermediaries when I've been digging into like the Venezuela stuff and like how the Venezuelan corruption happens. First, you have a company that like embezzles the money, that steals the money from PDVSA, from Venezuela, and then they give it to an intermediary. The intermediary then is the company that often will, with a banker, launder it, right? And then once the money gets laundered through the intermediaries, it can then be put in like a Swiss bank account, and that's where it ends up, like at Credit Suisse. So this would be one of these intermediaries that would do something like that. Its business model typically involves, here's the steps: buying gas from Russian suppliers, such as Gazprom, importing the gas into Ukraine, distributing the gas to the industrial customers, and then handling payment flows and debt offsets. So they're basically, it's like a middleman. They're taking the gas from the producers, they're giving it to industrial suppliers on the ground in Ukraine. The industrial suppliers are then responsible for actually getting it to the customers, right? So at that point, really what UESU is doing is handling the flow of money and making sure that the payment flows stay on course, so the cash flow is positive. This specific company ends up controlling a significant share of Ukraine's gas imports. It becomes one of the most powerful private firms in Ukraine in the 90s. And then that lends itself to political connections, specifically in the Dnipropetrovsk region, which is the region on the Dnieper River, and that kind of becomes the really, really important region, the really important place in Ukraine during the Maidan Coup, right? And post Maidan Coup, because that's where this Russian-speaking, Russian ethnic area of Ukraine in the east meets like the more traditional Ukrainian region at the Dnieper River. And so this Tymoshenko, she becomes a visible public figure because of her prominence running this company. That then lends itself to her going into politics and becoming a politician. However, there were a lot of controversies. There were legal disputes. The 1990s gas trade was very corrupt. There was lots of corruption that was happening across the industry. Lots of large state payments from the government. And whenever you have that, you're going to have kleptocracy. You're going to have corruption, whether you're talking about the Soviet Union or you're talking about the United States of America. That's going to happen. The contracts were written in such a way that there was a lot of opportunity to gouge the contract, to embezzle, to take from it. This is similar to how I think these PDVSA contracts are written. So accusations are later brought by Viktor Yanukovych, and apologize on these Slavic names. They trip me up. But you remember when we talked about the Orange Revolution, there are two presidents that we're talking about, two leaders, right? And let's go back and just look at these guys real quick. So you got to go back 2 weeks, but you have these two guys. You have Yashchenko, and then you have Yanukovych. And somebody put that like pronunciation guide in the Rumble rant, and I appreciate that. But remember, the Yashchenko, this is the regime stooge, right? This is the guy that is like pro-EU. He's pro-Europe, pro-European Union. And what happens is that this guy, who is pro-Russia, he wins the election in 2004. He's then immediately accused of stealing the election by National Endowment for Democracy and USAID and all those, that whole matrix of organizations. They hold another election. Yashchenko ends up winning. He becomes president, and he's president from 2004 until or 2005 until 2010. With Tymoshenko stepping in late as leader. So I think he actually serves from, if I'm not mistaken, let me see. Yeah, so he is in office till 2010, but he also has Tymoshenko, I believe, serving under him. Yeah, as prime minister right here. So she's one of his prime ministers, as it looks like Yanukovych's as well. So Tymoshenko serving under Yushchenko, and these names are going to get really, really confusing here. She kind of comes into power in the late 2000s, and then there's an election that's held in 2010. Yanukovych, this guy right here, runs against Tymoshenko in 2010, and he wins. So again, he's the pro-Russian president. Upon winning the election, I don't want to get too ahead of myself, but he ends up arresting her, accusing her of corruption. We're going to talk about that here in a little bit. But he ends up arresting her and throwing her in prison. And that's obviously controversial. But he also doesn't necessarily go straight to Putin and say, oh yeah, we're going to 100% just jump right in bed with Putin because this guy, Tymoshenko, had already set Ukraine on this path toward like integration with the European Union. And for whatever reason, Yanukovych continues that momentum. He kind of picks it up. He's like, all right, so y'all have already started this process with the European Union. There's a lot of, I mean, I'm sure there's probably was a lot of pressure from the EU and the United States to continue that. So he does continue that. And he says in private, this is this guy, Yanukovych, he says privately that, you know, Putin is not necessarily a great partner because Putin is not, doesn't view Ukraine as like on equal footing as Russia. He kind of views Ukraine as this, as like a fiefdom, like a vassal almost of Russia. And so he doesn't seem to fully trust like the idea of fully integrating with Russia. So he turns to Europe and he says, all right, show me what you got. They don't come back with a great proposal either. So he is not thrilled with that proposal either. And that leads to problems for him. Now, before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's back up a little bit and go back to the energy crisis of 2006. So Tymoshenko is the head of that UESE company, like the energy trading house. And then you have these two gas companies that are operating in Ukraine. And one of them is Gazprom, and the other one is Naftogaz. So Gazprom we're very familiar with because Gazprom we learned about back when we did the aluminum wars. We learned about it when we did when we did one of the episodes on Putin, I believe, or maybe it was the episode on Medvedev. The reason we learned about Gazprom is because as we were looking at Putin's kind of the wings of his party, remember, this was, I guess maybe this was during the, I'm trying to remember what chapter this was. I can't remember if it was the Georgia War, or maybe it was the Chechen War. Doesn't matter. But this guy, Dmitry Medvedev, who we're very familiar with, he was the Russian president from 2008 until 2012. And the reason he became president is because the Russian constitution said you could only serve 2 terms. And so after Putin's second term, he selects Medvedev to be his successor. Medvedev becomes president in 2008. Putin swaps out and becomes prime minister, right? And then while Medvedev is president during his term from 2008 until 2012, he has the constitution rewritten to allow Putin to come back in 2012 and become president again. Now, prior to 2008, Medvedev is the head of Gazprom. So Gazprom is like when I mentioned Tymoshenko and her energy trading house company, she is buying natural gas from Gazprom. And then she's turning around, which is a Russian gas company. And then she is turning around and she is selling it to the energy suppliers in Ukraine. So the one of these companies that she would have been selling it to is Naftogaz. So Naftogaz, much like Gazprom being, kind of the state, like semi-state Russian state company, Naftogaz is like the Ukrainian company. So just some background here. After the Soviet Union collapses, Russia controls vast natural gas systems. Ukraine inherited a pipeline system that was built by the Soviets that transports Russian gas to Europe. Around 80% of the Russian gas exports to Europe flowed through Ukraine in the 1990s and the early 2000s. The basic arrangement was Gazprom sold gas to Naftogaz. Naftogaz paid for the gas and transported the Russian gas onward to Europe. Ukraine earned transit fees, which was a major source of state revenue. And this created a mutual dependence between Naftogaz, Gazprom, Ukraine and Russia. And this relationship in the 90s, brought Ukraine close to Russia, even though the negotiation was in the early 90s that Ukraine and some of these, I think it was Ukraine, Kazakhstan, and I think it was Belarus, all gave up the nuclear weapons that the Soviets had housed on their soil in exchange for sovereignty. They got sovereignty in exchange for giving up the nuclear weapons. But the economic entanglement, specifically with Ukraine, because of these pipelines, really brought Ukraine back under Russia's thumb in a lot of ways. Hence, Yanukovych saying, Putin doesn't view us as a partner. He kind of views us as a vassal. Now, in the early 2000s, Ukraine is getting favorable pricing from Russia. They're getting below market pricing. The gas debts are accumulating. The payments are not flowing properly, right? And remember, Tymoshenko is one of the people responsible for those payments. She would have been responsible for getting the money from Ukraine, paying Russia for it. The payments aren't happening. And a lot of times they have to turn to a bartering system or get third-party mediators involved in order to get these debts paid off. This contributes to the allegations brought against her in 2010, which leads to her imprisonment, accused of corruption. So after the Orange Revolution of 2004, Gazprom adjusts the pricing, right? Because remember, what happens in the Orange Revolution? A pro-Russian politician wins the election, is accused of stealing the election, a new election is held, and then a pro-European, anti-Russian politician, Tymoshenko, is installed. And so as a result of that, Gazprom, Medvedev, raises the gas prices to European levels. Like, we're going to charge, all right, if you want to go play with Europe and you want to go be a European, we're going to charge you European prices, right? This, obviously, this causes strife with the Ukrainian political class, but it also causes problems with the payment system that was already under stress because of the corruption and a lot of the problems that were just inherent in Ukraine and Russia in the 90s and early 2000s. So Ukraine was arguing that they were being used as a geopolitical tool, basically, like in this game between Russia and Europe. Russia's arguing that, they should just pay, like, Ukraine should be forced to pay market rates. They were giving them favorable treatment. They were giving them, a preferential pricing, preferential treatment, but that's now over because now you have a pro-European president who wants to integrate y'all into the European Union. And this leads to the gas wars. 2006 crisis, Gazprom decides to cut gas supplies during a pricing dispute. The European deliveries drop temporarily, so Europe stops receiving gas from Gazprom. And this really emphasizes the dependency that Europe has on not only on Russian oil, Russian gas for energy, but also like how important Ukraine is, because they realize, man, Ukraine is super important because these pipelines that run through their territory. At the same time, as just a quick side note, 2006 is also the year that I probably have this. I bet you I have this somewhere right here. Just give me 1 second. Let me see if I can find it. Because this is also when, what's his name, defects from the Putin. He defects from the Putin government. He goes to London, and then he basically does like a tell-all at this consortium, this like conference that is hosted by the military industrial complex. It's all the defense contractors, primarily from Britain, but also from the United States. And that is, as far as I can tell, that is really when they start talking about Putin being a dictator. They start talking about Putin being evil. They start like rebranding Putin. I mean, I think there was always a natural distrust of Putin since the beginning, but especially in 2003 when he throws George Soros out of Moscow and the Open Societies Foundation. But 2006 is when this really kicks into a higher gear. And I believe it is it this guy? Just give me 1 second. No, it's not him. It is... Is it this guy? I don't want to spend too much time trying to figure out exactly who it was, but it was one of these guys who defected and then runs and goes and does like a tell-all, right? And I may have set him aside. But anyway, I just thought that was interesting. 2006, there seems to be this really important moment that happens in 2006 where Putin is kind of rebranded as the evil dictator. And I wonder if this is one of the contributing factors that leads to that, where Ukraine is getting stiffed as far as from their perspective, as far as pricing goes. Europe gets basically cut off temporarily by Russia. And then it really highlights, hey, man, Europe is super dependent on Russia. This is a real problem. And remember, this is still during the time of Bush, right? We're still like in the Bush administration. So getting back to this timeline, we have the gas wars. So 2009 crisis, the larger dispute over debt and pricing formulas. By this point, we've had the Georgian War has unfolded. We already did that. We did that a month or two back. A long-term, let's see, gas supplies halted for nearly 2 weeks in the wintertime, which causes all kinds of issues in Europe. A long-term contract is signed between Gazprom and Naftogaz, which includes a take-or-pay clause requiring Ukraine to buy a minimum volume regardless of their need. The pricing formula was oil indexed and later criticized as too expensive for Ukraine. So enter Yanukovych. So Yanukovych comes in and he signs the 2010 Kharkiv Pact. And what this does is it extends the lease that the Russian Navy is using for a base in Crimea. I believe that base is at, what's it called? It'll come to me in a minute. Sevastopol, right? That's the base at Sevastopol, the submarine base, if I'm not mistaken. And in exchange, Ukraine gets gas discounts. And so the relationship between Gazprom and Naftogaz is temporarily stabilized. Tymoshenko is thrown in jail. Ukraine is still straining financially, even though this contract is favorable to them and helps them out. They are still struggling financially. A big part of that is the corruption. A big part of that is mismanagement. And they continue to complain that they're being overcharged, even though they're getting a discount. So with that said, let's shift to a video and we'll watch a little bit of this to explain some of the more nuance of what's happening here. So I'm going to back up a little bit because I think whenever these documentaries do a good job of using maps, I like to use the maps because I think it's good. It's very illustrative. So let's I'll probably skip through a little bit of this documentary as we go, just for the sake of time. But let's just, I backed it all the way up to 1991, so we can kind of get a little bit of a rehash as we're going into the Maidan Coup.
Ever since Ukraine gained its independence in 1991,
I think I might have it on, yeah, I have it on 1.2. Hold on. There we go.
Following the demise of the Soviet Union, this Eastern European nation stood at the crossroads in terms of its strategic foreign policy course, integrating with Europe or maintaining close relations with Russia. This became the main issue of the political, cultural, and geographical divide in Ukraine, and the issue has been the cause of the biggest political mobilization.
I really like this map they've done here because they've taken the European Union and they've just created one big block because this is a really nice diagram right here. You see Russia on the east, you see the European Union on the west, Ukraine is sandwiched right in the middle, right? And if we go back to the mind map, I can show you the maps, which are right. Where did I put those? Where did I put those maps? Right here. You can see like these are the pipelines that run through Ukraine that supply natural gas to Europe. And remember, because of the Orange Revolution and the energy crisis of 2006, Putin decides to build two new pipelines. He decides to build a pipeline in the Baltic Sea, known as the Nord Stream pipeline. That's the one that they blew up, remember? Famously, I think back in, was it 2023, 2020? I think it was 2023. They blew it up, maybe 2024. And then the other one was the Turk Stream pipeline in the Black Sea. So Putin builds those two pipelines, and that's basically a workaround Ukraine because he sees Ukraine is a problem. Europe and the U.S. and the CIA and MI6 are obviously very deep in Ukraine, and just to give him more options for how he can sell to customers, how Russia can sell to customers, they build these other pipelines just to diversify. So Turk Stream in the Black Sea and Nord Stream in the Baltic to bypass Eastern Europe and bypass Ukraine.
Processes in the history of independent Ukraine, even prior to the Euromaidan. In 2004, the pro-European candidate Viktor Yushchenko ran for the presidency against the Russian-backed Viktor Yanukovych, and following electoral fraud, Yushchenko's supporters took to the streets to demand free and fair elections.
We have to remember that a lot of these documentary makers on YouTube are highly vaccinated, so they are going to sound vaccinated when they talk about this stuff. You just have to kind of roll with the punches there.
And ultimately a European choice for Ukraine. Mass protests, known as the Orange Revolution, eventually led to the repeat of the second round of presidential elections, ending in Yushchenko's victory. His term is remembered for the creation of closer ties with Europe, while relations with Russia soured, culminating in several gas disputes. But Yushchenko was unable to curb the endemic corruption and improve the living standards of ordinary Ukrainians, and as a result, he came only fifth in the 2010 presidential election, which his old rival Yanukovych won. During his presidency, Yanukovych had been accused of repressions against his political opponents and the independent media, parochialism, and very high levels of corruption, he and his family benefiting personally. But despite being known for his pro-Russian stance, Yanukovych continued on the path of integration with the European Union. On the 30th of March 2012, the EU Association Agreement was initiated by Kyiv and Brussels. Despite problems associated with the arrest of the former Prime Minister of Ukraine and its main opposition figure, Yulia
Tymoshenko
on corruption charges, and in general questions regarding Ukraine's human rights record, the talks on the association agreement progressed between the sides. According to the poll conducted in December 2011 by the Ilko Kucherev Democratic Initiatives Foundation, prior to the Euromaidan revolution, 46% of Ukrainians supported Ukraine's accession to the EU, while 33% were against it. Western and northern provinces of the country, which have
Okay, so remember, Dnipro is that's that really important area that I was talking about. And that's an important area because after the Maidan Coup, Igor Kolomoisky becomes the governor of that region. So that's a really, really important region. And that's also just north of Zaporizhzhia, which is where I think that's the largest nuclear reactor in all of Europe is located there, if I'm not mistaken.
Traditionally voted in favor of pro-Western politicians and parties in prior elections, were predominantly for the EU membership, while southern and eastern regions, including Donbass and Crimea, strongholds of Yanukovych and his pro-Russian party of the regions, were mostly against this, preferring closer ties with Russia. While the level of public support for the EU accession of Ukraine was by no means overwhelming, almost half the population was in favor of this. The progress in negotiations was considerable, and the expectation was that Ukraine was going to sign the EU association agreement at the Vilnius summit in November 2013. But complicated processes were going on in the background, as Yanukovych worked on improving the terms of the deal with the EU and the IMF, persuading his pro-Russian party of the benefits of closer integration with Europe, while trying to appease Russia at the same time. Needless to say, this was a very difficult task, which Yanukovych absolutely botched. It is more than evident now that the Kremlin sees Ukraine not as an independent state, but as its own backyard. Hence, Putin was extremely unhappy with Yanukovych, who was supposed to be his ally, choosing Europe over Russia. In 2013, Russia increased gas prices for Ukraine and started blocking sales of Ukrainian-produced meat, cheese, and some other food products, along with abolishing the duty-free regime for steel pipes. Decades of existence within the Soviet Union had made Ukraine's industry very closely aligned with Russia, particularly in Donbass, the base of Yanukovych's.
So there's the economic entanglement. That's the economic entanglement that I was talking about. It's not just natural gas, it's all kinds of industry.
Party of regions. Thus, bans on the import of Ukrainian-made produce were a significant problem for Ukraine, to say the least. The then Prime Minister of Ukraine, Mykola Azarov, claimed that Ukraine had lost almost $7 billion in exports due to Russia-imposed restrictions. According to Reuters, in September 2013, just 2 months before the intended signing of the EU association agreement, Yanukovych gathered the party elite in Kyiv to share his plans of closer integration with Europe. Many prominent party members, who were also business owners and industry chiefs in Donbass, were concerned that their businesses would suffer as a result of the Kremlin's trade war. They complained about the harm that Yanukovych's decision will inflict on eastern Ukraine. The then president of Ukraine reportedly responded, "Forget about it, forever." Yanukovych brushed aside all the complaints, declaring his goal to his party members, "We will pursue integration with Europe." A former member of the Party of Regions, Inna Bohoslovka, told Reuters that during this meeting, Viktor Yanukovych criticized Russia for not seeing Ukraine as an equal and for trying to take advantage of Ukraine. But Yanukovych did not deem terms offered by Europe suitable either. According to Reuters, Yanukovych estimated that Ukraine would need $160 billion in 3 years to survive the harm inflicted by the trade ban from Russia and losses from reforms requested by the EU. But the EU was ready to offer only 610 million euros. An EU source told Reuters that had Ukraine signed the association agreement and reached an understanding with the IMF, Kyiv would have received at least 19 billion euros, but this money was never mentioned to Ukrainian representatives. Ukraine's permanent representative for NATO during the Yanukovych era, Vladimir Olenik, claimed that the IMF was ready to offer only 5 billion in loans, part of which would have been used to pay previous loans. Furthermore, there was a matter of Yulia Tymoshenko, the imprisoned opposition leader hated by Yanukovych, whose release was demanded by the EU as a condition of signing the association agreement. But while
doesn't that sound familiar? We demand that you release this person from prison. That's Alexei Navalny. Remember, he's the guy who was poisoned in the Siberian prison last year. He's another one of these, like Maria Corina Machado, National Endowment for Democracy Creations. Maria Corina Machado herself, her friends who were thrown in prison, and the demand is that they get released. So this is like the same thing over and over and over and over and over again. But this woman was guilty of corruption. She did engage in corruption, and her imprisonment was probably legitimate in terms of the allegations that were levied against her, despite the fact that Yanukovych was clearly biased towards her and did not like her. They did not have a good relationship.
European terms had been deemed harsh by the Ukrainian government of the time. The main cause of Yanukovych's U-turn was Russia's pressure. On November 9, 2013, less than 20 days before the supposed day of the signing of the EU association agreement, Yanukovych secretly met with Putin. Then, on November 20th, the Prime Minister Azarov met with his Russian colleague Dmitry Medvedev in St. Petersburg. We do not know exactly what the sides talked about in these meetings, but a day later, on November 21st, Yanukovych declared that Ukraine would not sign the association agreement. According to the foreign policy advisor to the Lithuanian president, Jovita Nalipšienė, Yanukovych called the Lithuanian president before announcing his decision, stating that Ukraine was in no position to resist the Russian economic pressure and blackmail. Earlier, Armenia backed off from signing the association agreement under pressure from Russia, opting to join the Kremlin-led Eurasian Customs Union instead. Yanukovych's U-turn came as a shock to Ukrainian society, which thought of the signing of the association agreement as a foregone conclusion. On the same day, journalists Mustafa Nayyem and Yuri Andreev, along with one of the opposition leaders, Arseniy Yatsenyuk, called people to gather at the iconic Maidan Nezalezhnosti, the Independence Square. A few thousand people, mostly the youth, gathered in central Kyiv. Soon, opposition parties started to join as well. On November 24th, tens of thousands gathered at the Maidan. For 9 days, protests demanding integration with Europe and the resignation of the government were mostly peaceful, but on the night of November 30th, Berkut special police units violently dispersed a few hundred people remaining at the protest area. In hindsight, the violent response by the Yanukovych regime was a miscalculation, as it gave impetus to the protest movement, the size of which was modest by Ukrainian standards before that. In response, the main opposition parties established the headquarters of national resistance. The process started gathering revolutionary momentum. On December 1st, a huge crowd of hundreds of thousands gathered in downtown Kyiv. Soon, clashes ensued, and the most radical elements in the crowd fought with the riot police near the presidential administration. Then the protesters occupied the Kyiv City Council and the trade unions building. The day ended with speeches of the opposition leaders condemning the attack on the presidential administration, along with calling for a national strike and the resignation of Yanukovych. The tent city, akin to the one in the Orange Revolution, started being constructed in central Kyiv. Barricades were erected. For several days after the December 1st clashes, protests spread to several western Ukrainian cities like Lviv and Ternopil, while in Kyiv, protesters attempted to block several government buildings, but overall the situation remained stable. Rumors about Yanukovych's intention to join the Eurasian Customs Union circled, which further fueled public dissatisfaction. On December 8th.
Okay, so we're at December of 2013. So we haven't and the Maidan Coup, of course, happens in January, February of 2014. So we're almost there. Before we get there, though, let's back up a little bit because I can't recall if this video goes into this at all, but we should absolutely talk about this guy. This guy's going to look familiar to some of you. Remember this guy? Alexander Turchinov. So Alexander Turchinov, a Ukrainian politician. He is former secretary of the National Security and Defense Council of Europe. He served as in 2005. So when Yushchenko comes in to office in 2005, this guy, Turchinov, is appointed as the head of the SBU, the Security Service of Ukraine. Turchinov is a former acting president, or I'm sorry, no, I'm just reading that. That's from Wikipedia. But so he was the first deputy chairman of the political party known as the Batvitz China. And yeah, that word China, I know a lot of people like to say China is like points to Ukraine. Well, this party was called Batvitz China, and it stands for All Ukrainian Union Fatherland. Okay, so he is the first deputy chairman, and the party leader, of course, is Yulia Tymoshenko. So him and Yulia Tymoshenko are actually very, very close. Okay, so Yulia Tymoshenko, let's actually have I have a diagram that shows their relationship and how they knew each other. Let's look at that. Where is that? That is right here. Okay. So their political alliance goes all the way back to the late 1990s. She emerges as as she is the head of that energy trading house, she's starting to get her feet wet in terms of political going into the political theater, the political arena. And she becomes a national opposition leader to the president. At the time was Kuchma. And so Turchinov joins her political camp and becomes one of her most trusted strategists. He's an organizational manager inside of her political party. He becomes the head of her security. He plays like a role in like her intelligence gathering during the Orange Revolution. Because remember, she was like the figurehead of the Orange Revolution. She was the Maria Corina Machado of the Orange Revolution, right? And he is like her head of the security. He's like the her intelligence guy. He's like her fixer, basically, right? And so Turchinov is helping to coordinate opposition structures and messaging. And this is when they become very, very tight. This is when they become politically intertwined, 2004. And so they create this party called the Batvishina, which I think stands for fatherland. And she's the charismatic, like populist public leader. And he is the operational organizer, like the internal manager, right? So she's the public face and he's kind of like the guy running everything behind the scenes. And so he's the deputy party leader. He's the acting head. Whenever she's sidelined doing other things, he becomes the acting head. She mobilizes voters. He runs the party's machinery, like the political party's machinery. So then under her, when she becomes prime minister under Yushchenko in 2005, he gets appointed, Turchinov gets appointed as the head of the SBU, Ukraine's security service. He also becomes, at one point, the deputy prime minister. And this obviously deepens the alliance between Tymoshenko and Turchinov. It says here he was viewed as loyal, disciplined, and somebody who kept a low profile compared to her, which, she was a very public figure. She was Maria Corina Machado. Okay. So then 2010 happens. Yanukovych wins the election. He prosecutes Tymoshenko, puts her in prison in 2011. Turchinov actually gets arrested. He gets investigated and briefly detained, but I do think he ends up getting released from prison. But the reason he gets arrested, and this is where it gets really interesting. This is how I know about this guy. He gets arrested because, remember, he was the head of the SBU, and then I guess he became like deputy prime minister. So I don't think he's the head of the SBU come 2010. But once Yushchenko loses the election, and so Yushchenko being the president and Tymoshenko being the prime minister, they lose their election. This guy, Turchinov, is obviously still working for the SBU. He goes into the office of the SBU. This is Ukrainian Secret Service or Ukrainian intelligence services, like their CIA. And he destroys the entire file that they have amassed on this guy, Simeon Mogilevich. And so Mogilevich is Israeli, as is Turchinov. Both Turchinov and Mogilevich are Israeli. And Mogilevich is another one of these energy czars, like energy oligarchs, like gas oligarchs. His company is Ros-Ukr Ernego. Okay. And that company is at the center of that entire like Russia-Ukraine battle that's happening, like the energy war, the gas war, the gas crisis. This guy is right at the center of it. Now, the other thing that Mogilevich was doing that I learned from research on him is that he became the top supplier for ecstasy for the Gambino crime family. So everybody's familiar with, John Gotti and the Gambino crime family. This guy, Mogilevich, is the one who was shipping drugs into New York City via Brighton Beach. Brighton Beach is like, apparently you go to Brighton Beach and it's like everybody there is Ukrainian and or Jewish. And that there's a massive like Jewish mafia, like Ukrainian, Israeli mafia presence there. And so they were shipping the drugs into Brighton Beach, and then that's how it would get disseminated in the city. And of course, Rudy Giuliani at the time in the 90s is there like fighting all of that. But prior to this, back up to the Soviet Union, 1991, when it collapses, 1987, Mogilevich is like sees the writing on the wall, as do all of like these KGB like mob bosses that had formed. They all see the writing on the wall. They see that the Soviet Union is going to collapse, and they're worried about their assets. They're worried about their money. They're worried about, we all saw what the Bolsheviks did in 1917, right? How do I know my money is going to be safe? If I have all my money sitting in a vault somewhere at some bank, how do I know that bank's not going to get burned to the ground and, the vault ransacked? So he needs help getting his money out of Ukraine. Well, he turns to Robert Maxwell, Ghislaine Maxwell's father. Ghislaine Maxwell's father, who at the time is helping the Israeli government try to save their economy. Their economy is in complete disarray in the 80s because they had a closed system economy. They had a closed economy. It's basically like a socialist, like communist economy, right? Very, very heavily regulated by the state. They didn't allow outside investors. You couldn't just go like invest in a company in Ukraine or in Israel. And they desperately needed money. They needed like an infusion of cash. And this Mogilevich guy gets dumped right in Robert Maxwell's lap. And he says, hey, I have $100 billion that I need to get out of Ukraine like immediately before the Soviet Union collapses. Robert Maxwell says, that's great. We have really, really, really nice banking laws here, very low scrutiny because we want people parking their money in Israel. So why don't you bring all that cash over to Israel? I'll get you a passport. I'll get you citizenship. You're Jewish, right? Oh, great. Yeah, you're Jewish. Great. We'll make you a Israeli citizen. Put all your money in these Israeli banks. We'll clean the money for you, right? And then when it comes out the other side, it'll be clean. And you can invest it in, you'll invest it in the Israeli economy to clean it, right? And then when it comes out the other side, it'll land in these Israeli banks, and then you can take it to Turkey or Cyprus. You can take it to Cayman Islands. You can take it to Switzerland, wherever you want. And so that $100 billion that Mogilevich invests in the Israeli economy to clean it, because he's trying to get it out of the Soviet Union, and he obviously doesn't think he can go to the Western banks. That's what saves the Israeli economy. As I understand it, that's what saves the Israeli economy. It also, Netanyahu is starting to come in to power. He's the foreign minister at this point. This would have been the early 90s. And he is responsible in the 90s for opening up the Israeli economy and into a more capitalist type system. It's still not like a free and fair market like today, but it's moved much closer to that because of Netanyahu. So Netanyahu sees what Mogilevich does, and he's like, we need more of this, we need more of this, we need more of this. And so Mogilevich moves to Israel and continues to operate, continues to run the mafia, continues to traffic ecstasy to Brighton Beach. Basically, it becomes a triangle between Brighton Beach and New York, Ukraine, and then Israel. And then that leads to its own problems in Israel, where you have a lot of organized crime running the streets. That's a whole different episode of this show, and we will do an episode on all of that. But it's just important to point out how interconnected all of this is, because not only do you have Israel now tied into all of this, you also have the organized crime syndicate, the Jewish / Israeli / Ukrainian / Russian / Khazarian mafia. That is directly in bed with the Gambino crime family, the Italian mafia of New York City, the five families. But you also have Robert Maxwell, Ghislaine Maxwell's father, right? So there's obviously a massive file on this guy, Mogilevich, because of everything I just went through. And I'm only scratching the surface here, right? They have this massive file at the SBU, and Turchinov and I'm sure Mogilevich are worried about what what this new guy, Yanukovych, is going to do to Mogilevich when he comes into power, because I'm sure Mogilevich has seen what Putin was doing to these Russian gangsters in Moscow. So he obviously tells Turchinov, who is, works for him clearly, to go into the office and destroy the entire file. And that's what he does. That's why he gets arrested. So he gets arrested, investigated, put in jail. For whatever reason, he gets released. I don't have the actuals on why he was released, but he is released. And then he continues to operate kind of as like an opposition figure. He's the head of the Ukrainian legislature, like the opposition party in the Ukrainian legislature in 2011, 2012, 2013. And then when the Maidan coup happens, I don't want to get too ahead of ourselves, but it's already right here on the screen. When the Maidan coup happens in February 21st, 2014, this is the guy when Yanukovych flees the country, right? Runs off to Russia. This guy is the guy that the CIA installs as interim president. And so he serves as president from February 21st, 2014 until June 7th, 2014, when they swear in Petro Poroshenko. So that's pretty wild to me. This guy went from getting arrested by the SBU for destroying a massive file they had on this major Ukrainian crime lord. He's credited as one of the biggest crime lords in Ukraine. His personal lawyer, by the way, was William Sessions, who was the director of the FBI during the first Bush administration. So he was the director of the FBI from 87 to 93, meaning he was the director of the FBI beginning in Reagan's last term through the Bush administration. And then he remains Mogilevich's personal attorney up until he dies, up until Sessions dies in June of 2020. That's pretty notable. It's like, not only is this guy a major crime boss that is running drugs for the Gambino crime family, that is connected to Israel, that's connected to Ukraine, that's connected to the Maidan coup, it's connected to the Gambino crime family, connected to Brighton Beach, New York City, but his personal attorney is William Sessions, the director of the FBI under Reagan and Bush Sr. I mean, I feel like that right there is like, just stop the show right there. Like, that's the punchline. We can all go home. But it gets even crazier from there. We'll kind of put Mogilevich on a shelf for now because, that whole rabbit hole, I think, deserves its own chapter. But let's go back to the video we were watching and finish up here, because I think that video was doing a good job of explaining the actuals of, if I can find the video. Yeah, here it is. So we're back on December 8th. We're gonna let this play out until we get to the actual revolution.
Massive demonstration took place in central Kyiv, the culmination of which was the destruction of Lenin's monument by the activists of the nationalist party Svoboda. While Yanukovych was seeking a way out of the crisis by meeting the EU representatives and holding a round-table meeting with all former presidents of Ukraine, his riot police were clashing with protesters to dismantle their barricades and tents. But this news only mobilized the public, as the barricades were reinstated almost immediately after the riot police left. Talks between Yanukovych, the opposition leaders, and civil society representatives did not lead to any positive results. The signing of the Ukrainian-Russian action plan on December 17th only exacerbated tensions. Protests and clashes in central Kyiv continued for several more weeks, when on January 16th, the Yanukovych administration pushed on to adopt draconian anti-protest laws. Instead of calming the situation down, it ultimately gave another push to the protest movement and made the matters worse for the government. On January 19th, hundreds of thousands gathered in central Kyiv on a Sunday in open defiance of the new law. Heavy clashes between protesters and the riot police near Hrushevsky Street continued for 3 days. On January 21st to 22nd, the protest movement reached the point of no return, when the news of the death of 3 protesters emerged. 2 of them were killed by shots fired by the police. Things started spiraling out of control as violent scenes in Kyiv and images of tortured protesters showed the level of crisis occurring in Ukraine. The Ministry of Internal Affairs accused the opposition of stockpiling firearms in the occupied buildings of the Kyiv City Hall and House of Trade Unions. Yanukovych once again met with the opposition leaders and offered Yatsenyuk the position of prime minister, along with promising to consider constitutional amendments decreasing the powers of the president. This was followed by the rollback of some of the anti-protest laws, along with the resignation of the Azarov government. But along with attempting to appease the opposition by offering half measures, the Yanukovych administration continued repressions against protesters. The attempts of the US government and the EU officials to broker a solution between the government and the opposition did not lead to any fruition either, as the opposition demanded immediate constitutional reform, while the government refused to offer amnesty to all detained protesters. Still, after the protest movement agreed to—
So again, like we have to look at this with clear eyes now, because this is a very, very difficult situation to navigate if you're Yanukovych, because look at what's happening in Iran right now, right? Like Mossad and the CIA are openly bragging. Like Mike Pompeo is openly bragging about the fact that Mossad and the CIA are helping the protesters overthrow the Iranian government. You have Lindsey Graham and all of them out there saying, yes, move forward and overthrow the Iranian government. So the Iranian government knows that these protesters on the ground are working for the CIA. They probably are CIA, right? And Mossad, trained by them, right? So, and these people show up with guns and they start shooting police officers in the head. They also start shooting, protesters as well, just to kind of add to the chaos. And then the protesters are blaming the cops. The cops are blaming the protesters. By the way, the exact same thing happens in the Maidan Coup, where snipers allegedly are shooting both sides. They're shooting the protesters and they're shooting the riot police. And then again, the riot police blame the protesters. The protesters blame the riot police. And so if you're the government involved, and you recognize that these are bad actors from a foreign government that have infiltrated your society and that have infiltrated this protest, and whose intention it is to violently overthrow your government by force and seize power, your inclination is going to be to respond harshly, right? But as you do that, the optics of that are that you're the bad guy, that you're the tyrant, and that is exactly what they do, and that's exactly what the Obama administration was waiting for. It's exactly what they were waiting for, and then with the media, so they could say, "Gotcha!" You're a tyrant, you're a draconian, you're the bad guy. Even though the people that they were going after were there to overthrow the government. Okay, let's play this for maybe another minute, and then we can shift gears.
To unblock key Kyiv roads and vacate occupied administrative buildings, the government adopted a law on amnesty. But the most dramatic events of the Revolution of Dignity were yet to come. On February 18th, protesters marched on the Ukrainian parliament building, where they were met with police resistance. Chaos ensued in central Kyiv, as it resembled a scene of battle. Police used live ammunition, rubber bullets, stun grenades, and other tools against the protesters, who retaliated with Molotov cocktails and set the barricades and then the building of the Party of Regions on fire. Dozens of protesters and policemen died in clashes on that day. The government funded—
By the way, exactly what was happening in Iran. Exactly. They were using Molotov cocktails. They were targeting government buildings. They were going after security forces. If they could catch a police officer by himself, they would attack that guy, right? So this is identical to what has been happening in Iran over the past month or two.
Provocateurs, known as Titushki, also took part in attacks against protesters, reportedly shooting one of them dead on February 19th. On the following day, more people died in clashes, mostly protesters killed by sniper fire, as the death toll reached 42 people. The Minister of Interior, Zakharchenko, admitted that combat weapons had been given to the police, citing the capture of several riot policemen and the necessity to conduct an anti-terrorist operation to release them. Foreign ministers of Germany...
So the protesters are capturing the police officers and dragging them away. And so Yanukovych and the government are like, all right, well, if you're capturing our police officers and dragging them away, then we're going to send in like combat troops to go save those guys, right? And this is just escalation, escalation, escalation.
France and Poland met with Yanukovych, who apparently agreed to hold presidential and parliamentary elections in the immediate future, and create a government of national unity until then. Putin also sent his envoy, Vladimir Lukin, to organize talks between the government and the opposition. Around the same time, one of the leaders of the Party of Regions, Alexander Yefremov, traveled to Luhansk, calling for secession or federalization of Ukraine if Yanukovych fails to stabilize the situation. The chairman of the Crimean parliament, Konstantinov, went to Moscow to call for the secession of Crimea from Ukraine in case of a power change in Ukraine. At the time, these statements may have looked unrealistic, but they ended up being a harbinger of things to come. The situation was getting worse for Yanukovych. His Party of Regions started to crumble as some of its elected members left the party. The deputy chief of staff of the Ukrainian army resigned in protest for attempting to use the army in internal affairs after Yanukovych dismissed the chief of staff under unclear circumstances, but probably for the same reason. Separate police units started joining the protest. On February 21st, in the last-ditch attempt to save his power, Yanukovych signed the Agreement on the Settlement of the Political Crisis in Ukraine, brokered by German, French, and Polish foreign ministers, and observed by the Russian representative with 3 opposition leaders. The agreement stipulated the return of the 2004 constitution, which envisaged decreased presidential powers, along with the formation of the Government of National Trust to oversee presidential elections to be held in 2014. The government would remove the law enforcement from central Kyiv, while the opposition would surrender all arms in its possession. Still, several leaders of the Euromaidan movement, not linked to the opposition parties, rejected the agreement, stating that protests would continue until the resignation of Yanukovych.
So that, I believe, is Klitschko. Klitschko is a famous MMA fighter, and I've asked Burning Bright about him. He's currently the mayor of Kiev, and Burning Bright says he's like widely hated in the MMA community because of his like association with all this stuff. So anyway, let's continue.
But they did not have to wait for long. Very soon, the riot police guarding Yanukovych's residence and government buildings left. Prominent figures of the Yanukovych government started to flee Kyiv. By February 22nd, Yanukovych had left too. The parliament voted to reinstate the 2004 constitution and impeached Yanukovych. The prominent opposition figure, Alexander Turchinov, was elected the chairman of the parliament and the acting president until the election of a new president. The Revolution of Dignity had won. 107 protesters and 13 policemen died during clashes in central Kyiv. In the future, we will talk about the events that transpired in the aftermath of the revolution in Ukraine, including the illegal annexation of Crimea and the start of the Russian-backed separatist movement in eastern.
Oh no, the illegal annexation of Crimea. Well, let's go ahead and talk about it. We don't need to wait for this clown to have this discussion. So he already mentioned before how the political leader, the head of the Crimean legislature, went to Moscow to plead his case and said, hey, like these people in Kiev do not have their shit together. Like this is a total dumpster fire. And we don't trust that these European leaders who are coming in and putting their thumb on the scale, that they actually have our best interests at heart. We want to secede from Ukraine, and we want you to help us do that. So that leads, remember, this is February 21st, February 22nd. And basically what's happening here is that the police are all defecting from their positions because they're being physically attacked by the rioters. They're probably not getting the proper backing from their superiors. Yanukovych is in way over his head. It seems like he's mismanaging the situation. He's not a firm, strong leader. You know, if Donald Trump had been the president of Ukraine at the time, this probably would have unfolded very differently. But He's trying to placate too many sides. He's trying to placate the Europeans. He's trying to placate the Americans. He's trying to placate the Russians, and he ends up placating nobody, including the police. The police are defecting and joining the protesters, and then eventually the police that are guarding his house just leave, and they're like, yeah, we're done. And because he doesn't have any personal security, he leaves and just goes to Moscow, goes to Russia. And because he does that, that's basically what surrenders the Ukrainian government to Alexander Turchinov, the SBU crime member, who serves as interim president for a couple months until they're able to swear in Poroshenko. So that's all on February 21st. A few days later, I think it's February 27th, these armed militia guys start showing up in Crimea. And later, it's they're identified as Russian. They're all identified as Russian military. And again, they were invited in by the Crimean leadership, by their political leadership. And you have to remember, this is a very diverse part of the world. Like in Crimea, you have a lot of Turkic bloodlines. They're like Khazarian, Turkic bloodlines. But they also have a very strong Christian community there because of the Greek colonies that were there. Sevastopol, I mentioned, that was where on the western coast of Crimea, that was where the baptism of Russia occurred in 988 AD, where Vladimir the Great was baptized, and then all of Russia within weeks, they all converted to Christianity. Okay, so again, we're up against the clock here. I don't think there's a culture of change tonight, but I don't want to go too much later than 9 anyway. So I have all of these different characters out here. This is why I said we're not going to get to everything tonight, because there's just too much to cover in this topic. It's vast. We haven't even gotten to Igor Kolomoisky yet, or the Azov Battalion, which forms as part of the Maidan Coup. But I do want to talk about Victoria Nuland, and I do want to talk about this phone call that she had. Before I do, I want to talk about the referendum. Okay, so here's the timeline. Yanukovych flees Kiev on February 22nd. 5 days later, armed personnel take control of key sites in Crimea. They later identify themselves as Russian troops, Russian military. March 6th, so this is like a week later, Crimea Parliament votes to hold a referendum. March 16th, the referendum takes place. So 10 days later, the referendum takes place. March 18th, Russia formally signs a treaty incorporating Crimea, because the referendum, they overwhelmingly vote to join Russia, to leave Ukraine and join Russia. And this is all done with like the Russian military, like occupying Crimea and protecting them. Russia completes the legal annexation process on March 21st. So literally it's like exactly a month after the Ukrainian government falls, Crimea is annexed by Russia willingly. And again, the way that the Western media reports this is that Russian tanks drive into Crimea and take it by force. They were invited in by the Crimean parliament, and they were asked, hey, we want to join Russia because we think that Ukraine's a shit show and we want nothing to do with this government. We want to join Russia. Please come in and help us do that. And there was an agreement. But because there's a very strong strategic value of Crimea, geographically speaking, in the Black Sea, the unipolar hegemony does not like that. And that is what leads to the Ukraine War of 2014, which we will do a separate episode on that actual war. This is the start of it right here. And that's going to be between the Azov Battalion and the Russians, right? But also NATO backing the Azov Battalion. And there's other militias involved as well. We'll get into all that. Igor Kolomoisky, the Israeli mafia, the Ukrainian mafia, the Russian mafia, the CIA, MI6, Mossad, all of it. Like all of those things play a role in this. And it all kind of culminates with the election of Vladimir Zelensky in 2019. So that kind of keys it up. You can see though how we're like all of this random stuff we've been talking about from the 90s and the 2000s and the 2010s. All of it is like leading to this bottleneck that is this conflict, and it directly connects to President Trump's first term. It directly connects to Joe Biden's term, and it directly connects to President Trump's second term, like the thing we're dealing with right now as I speak. Okay, so the actual vote, just to hit some facts. The Crimean voters were presented with two options in this referendum. The first one was to join Russia as a federal subject. One of these republics that we learned about when we learned about the dissolution of the Soviet Union. The other question was restoring Crimea's 1992 constitution, which effectively meant greater autonomy from Ukraine. Because I believe when Crimea, remember in 91 when the Soviet Union broke up, all these different places claim Georgia, Chechnya, like they all tried to say, oh yeah, like we're independent. And there was a lot to figure out. Crimea was one of the places that tried to grab its independence. Let's see. And so what the CIA hangs their hat on is that there was no option to maintain the existing status quo with Ukraine. The results, according to the Kremlin, 83% of the voting population turned out to vote, and 96 of them voted in favor to join Russia. And then the results were rejected by the entire West and rejected by the Ukrainian government. Okay, so to round this all out, to finish this all up, let's talk about Victoria Nuland, because that is a name that obviously we are all going to recognize. And you can see, I mean, there's just so many names here that I could run through that that's gonna strike a chord with you. But let's talk about Victoria Nuland. And who knows, like maybe Nuland, maybe she gets her own chapter. Maybe she deserves it. We'll have to think about that.
I have no doubt after our meeting that President Yanukovych knows what he needs to do. The whole world is watching. We want to see a better future for Ukraine. I made it absolutely clear to him that what happened last night, what has been happening in security terms here, is absolutely impermissible in a European state, in a democratic state. The United States stands with you in your search for justice, for human dignity, for security, for economic health, and for the European future that you have chosen and that you deserve.
Okay, and just to be clear, at this time, she is her formal title is she is the Assistant Secretary of State for European and Eurasian Affairs. She had just left being the spokesperson for the U.S. State Department. She left that position in April of 2013. So at this point, she is. Before that, she was the U.S. ambassador to NATO. And then under Biden, she would become the U.S. Department of Secretary of State, a Deputy Secretary of State, rather. Okay, so she is the Assistant Secretary to Eurasian Affairs. And then there's this other guy, and his name is Jeffrey Piot. He is the ambassador in Kiev, the ambassador to Ukraine. Okay. And Piot and her have this really famous phone call, and we're going to listen to that phone call right now. This is a phone call that gets leaked to the public.
What do you think? I think we're in play. The Klitschko piece is obviously the complicated electron here.
Klitschko being the MMA fighter who was like starting a political career. And he was anti-Russia. He was pro-Ukraine, like pro-European Union. He's like in that camp.
Especially the announcement of him as
currently the mayor of Kiev as of right now.
Deputy Prime Minister, and you've seen some of my notes on the troubles in the marriage right now. So we're trying to get a read really fast on where he is on this stuff. But I think your argument to him, which you'll need to make, I think that's the next phone call we want to set up, is exactly the one you made to Yachts. And I'm glad you sort of put him on the spot on where he fits in this scenario. And I'm very glad he said what he said in response.
Good. So I don't think Klitsch should go into the government. I don't think it's necessary. I don't think it's a good idea.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you think what in terms of him not going into the government, just let him sort of stay out and do his political homework and stuff. I'm just thinking in terms of sort of the process moving ahead, we want to keep the moderate Democrats together. The problem is going to be Tymoshenko and his guys. And, I'm sure that's part of what Yanukovych is calculating on all of this.
I think Yachts is the guy who's got the economic experience, the governing experience. He's the guy, what he needs is Klitsch and Tymoshenko on the outside. He needs to be talking to them 4 times a week. I just think Klitsch going in, he's going to be at that level working for Yatsenyuk. It's just not going to work.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. Okay. Good. Well, do you want us to try to set up a call with him as the next step?
My understanding from that call, but you tell me, was that the big three were going into their own meeting and that Yachts was going to offer in that context a three-way, the 3+1 conversation or 3+2 with you. Is that not how you understood it?
No, I mean, that's what he proposed, but I think just knowing the dynamic that's been with them where Klitschko has been the top dog, he's going to take a while to show up for whatever meeting they've got. He's probably talking to his guys at this point. So I think you reaching out directly to him helps with the personality management among the three, and it gives you also a chance to move fast on all this stuff and put us behind it before they all sit down and he explains why he doesn't like it.
Okay, good. I'm happy. Why don't you reach out to him and see if he wants to talk before or after?
Okay, will do. Thanks.
Okay, I've now written, one more wrinkle for you, Jeff.
Yeah.
Can't remember if I told you this or if I only told Washington this, that when I talked to Jeff Feltman this morning, he had a new name for the UN guy, Robert Seri. Did I write you that this morning?
Yeah, okay. I saw that.
He's now gotten both Seri and Ban Ki-moon to agree that Seri could come in Monday or Tuesday.
Okay.
So that would be great, I think, to help glue this thing and have the UN help glue it. And, fuck the EU.
No, exactly. And I think we've got to do something to make it stick together, because you can be pretty sure that if it does start to gain altitude, the Russians will be working behind the scenes to try to torpedo it. And again, the fact that this is out there right now, I'm still trying to figure out in my mind why Yanukovych did that. But in the meantime, there's a Party of Regions faction meeting going on right now, and I'm sure there's a lively argument going on in that group at this point. But anyway, we could land jelly side up on this one if we move fast. So let me work on Klitschko, and if you can just keep, I think we want to try to get somebody with an international personality to come out here and help to midwife this thing. And then the other issue is some kind of outreach to Yanukovych, but we probably regroup on that tomorrow as we see how things start to fall into place.
So on that piece, Jeff, when I wrote the note, Sullivan's come back to me, VFR, saying you need Biden, and I said probably tomorrow for an attaboy and to get the deets to stick. So okay. Biden's willing.
Okay, great.
All right.
Thanks.
Yeah, and so that was a phone call from February 7th, 2014, where they say, where Nuland clearly says, Piot says we're in play, meaning like it's a go. The revolution is on. This is 2 weeks before the government's overthrown, and then they're basically they're laying plans for how they're gonna, like, what this government's gonna look like, who they want in, who they want out, And then Nuland clearly says, F the EU. Like, we don't want the EU touching this. We don't want them screwing this up because they're worried that they aren't competent enough, basically, to prevent the Russians from coming in and subverting the whole thing. So even like the public presentation of Ukraine is shifting towards a relationship with the EU, even that's like a lie. That's fake. They don't even want the EU involved. They're like, this is our government, the CIA's government. We're going to run this thing. The State Department's going to run this thing. And the whole point is to keep the Russians out. That's the entire point of why they did it. So anyway, this is it's bad. It's bad, guys. Real bad. She's obviously a very, very bad person. And then the last thing I'll show you. Remember this guy? Saakashvili. This is from the Russo-Georgian War of 2008. Remember, like the 7-day war. Well, Saakashvili was the president, the pro-NATO president who was trying to get Georgia to join NATO. Well, Saakashvili, not only is he prosecuted like in absentia, I think in 2017 by Georgia for being just absolutely corrupt up to his eyeballs, but he's also granted, as it says right here, it says in late 2013, ex-president Saakashvili left Georgia. In 2014, the prosecutor's office of Georgia filed criminal charges against him. In 2018, the Tbilisi City Court sentenced him in absentia to 6 years in prison for, among other things, ordering Valery Galashvili's beating. It says... So he was granted Ukrainian citizenship at some point. It says in July 2017, Saakashvili was stripped of his Ukrainian citizenship by President Poroshenko and became stateless. He re-entered Ukraine but was arrested in February 2018 and deported. He was granted permanent residence in the Netherlands, his wife's country. And then in May of 2019, he returned to Ukraine after the newly elected president, Volodymyr Zelensky, restored his citizenship. Zelensky then appointed Saakashvili to lead Ukraine's National Reform Council in May of 2020. And then, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, here's his Wikipedia. I believe, then he becomes, well, before that, from May 2015 until November 2016, he serves as the governor of Odessa. So somehow this guy goes from the president of Georgia, leading a war against Vladimir Putin, right? Loses the war, loses that situation, flees from that situation, and then goes to Ukraine, gets his Ukrainian citizenship like that, and then becomes the governor of Odessa under a CIA-controlled government. Are you seeing a pattern here? Are you seeing a pattern? And then he's prosecuted by his motherland, Georgia, for just being corrupt up to his eyeballs. Many. I don't know if I had that. I may not have had that on my screen, but this is. I apologize if I wasn't showing my screen, guys. But this is the guy, Saakashvili, and he looks like a clown, and he is a clown. So that pretty much does it. That wraps up the Book of Trump, chapter 46. So we'll see where we're going to go next. I have a lot of ideas. I have Zach Payne lined up to do. We're going to do Mel Gibson. That's going to be the middle of March. I also have JFK Jr. We're going to do JFK Jr. We're going to do Michael Jackson. I want to do Princess Diana. Those are like kind of the fun ones, right? Like the Dennis Rodman type ones. Remember, Mel Gibson is part of the Trump administration. He is Trump's liaison to Hollywood. And he's about to release The Resurrection of the Christ, the sequel, the highly anticipated sequel to the highest grossing R-rated film of all time, The Passion of the Christ. So I feel like it's very, very, very relevant to do Mel Gibson. We will do him with Zach Payne in March. Those other topics we're going to get lined up as we move forward. But we're going to do the actual 2014 Ukraine war between Russia and Azov Battalion. We'll do Igor Kolomoisky. And ultimately, this will lead us back to the Trump administration 1.0. And then we can really pick up what was happening with the Trump administration. Because as I mentioned on Alpha Show yesterday, State of the Union's tomorrow night, and the 2018 State of the Union, if you don't remember what happened there, that was one of the craziest episodes of the first Trump administration, where you had continuity of government plans. You had a train full of Republican congressmen getting attacked by a dump truck and it flipping over with all of their families on board. Crazy, crazy stuff happening at the State of the Union. So we're going to do that probably here in the next few weeks. We'll do the State of the Union from the 2018. But first, I want to hit a few other important milestones before we get there. So, guys, hit the thumbs up if you enjoyed this episode, this research. I hope that was comprehensible and that made sense. I really enjoy doing the show, so I think we will keep doing it as long as we can, as long as there's interesting stuff to talk about. I don't see any rants, but let's see if we have any boosts. If you're listening to this on replay, you can go to badlandsmedia.tv/boosts, or just click on the boosts at the top and you can leave a rant at any time. And as far as supporting us, Rumble takes a cut like 30% or whatever. Nobody takes a cut from the Badlands boost except for like the 3% processing fee. So let's see. I think we're good. We're good there as well. All right, guys. Well, hit the thumbs up. Oh, wait. $50 from Kellis. I am so glad you make this comprehensible. Well, there you go. Kellis, that's a very, very generous rant. Thank you so much for the feedback, and I'm glad that this is all making sense. I enjoy looking at this stuff because, these are subjects where it's like I feel like I kind of know it, but once you really get in there and you start looking at the minutia, and you start connecting the dots, and you're like, wow, this character is in this episode, he's in this episode, he's in this episode. You can kind of start to draw the through lines, and you really start to see the big picture. And the big picture is, of course, that Vladimir Putin is like the righteous leader of the free world, along with President Trump. And it's really exciting to see what they're doing right now, because I think the Sovereign Alliance is kind of coming to a head. So thank you, Kellis. And we will see y'all next week. I will announce what that episode is going to be. I'll keep y'all on edge and guessing. Thanks again, guys. Hit the thumbs up, and we will see you next time.
Thank you so much for joining us, and don't forget to hit the thumbs up on this video. And a special thank you to all of our advertising partners. Please remember to shift your dollars to support those businesses that support Badlands Media.